Before we begin, thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The serene beauty of the Cascade Mountains in Washington state hides countless dangers beneath its majestic peaks. In July 2023, 23-year-old Ethan Mercer set out on what should have been a 3-day solo hike along the Glacier Peak Wilderness Trail. An experienced backpacker with years of mountain experience, Ethan had completed this same route twice before. He sent his sister Lily a smiling selfie from the North Fork Sauk River trailhead, with Glacier Peak's snow-capped summit visible in the background. That was the last time anyone would hear from him. Search and rescue operations commenced 48 hours later, when Ethan missed his scheduled check-in. For 3 weeks, teams combed the rugged wilderness, but no trace of the young hiker was found. The case grew cold, becoming another tragic statistic of the mountains claiming a life. Then, in January 2025, 18 months after his disappearance, a winter climbing expedition made a chilling discovery on a remote, nearly inaccessible ledge 800 feet below the main trail. A single hiking boot, frozen to the rocky surface. Inside were the remains of a human foot. DNA testing confirmed what Ethan's family feared most. The boot belonged to Ethan Mercer. But this discovery didn't answer questions. It only deepened the mystery. How did Ethan's boot end up on a ledge, far from any established trail? And more disturbing still, where was the rest of him? Ethan Mercer had always been drawn to the wilderness. Growing up in Seattle with parents who prioritized outdoor adventures, he had summited his first peak at age 12. By 23, his Instagram feed was a gallery of conquests. Mount Rainier, Olympic National Park, the North Cascades. Friends described him as methodical and prepared, never the type to take unnecessary risks. He maintained detailed journals of his trips, carefully noting weather patterns, terrain challenges, and wildlife encounters. Ethan had graduated from Washington State University with a degree in environmental science just 2 months before his final hike, with plans to pursue a career in forest management. His sister Lily recalled their last conversation over dinner. Ethan had been excited about the solo journey, viewing it as a celebration of his graduation and a chance to clear his mind before starting his job search. Originally, Ethan's friend Marcus Collins was supposed to join him, but had canceled 3 days before departure due to a family emergency. This last-minute change didn't concern Ethan, who had hiked solo many times before. On the morning of July 15th, Ethan packed his car with meticulously organized gear, a high-end tent, sleeping bag rated for alpine conditions, 3 days of dehydrated meals, water filtration system, first aid supplies, emergency beacon, and his prized hiking boots, a gift from his father on his 21st birthday. The drive from Seattle to the trailhead took just under 3 hours. Parking lot security cameras captured Ethan arriving at 9:17 a.m., performing one final gear check, and setting off on the trail at 9:43 a.m. Beneath his confident exterior, however, Ethan carried a weight few knew about. His journal entries in the months before revealed a young man wrestling with uncertainty about his future and a growing sense of disillusionment with the increasingly crowded wilderness areas he once found solace in. He had written about wanting to find truly untouched places and had been researching off-trail routes in the Glacier Peak Wilderness. The Glacier Peak Wilderness Trail in July offers stunning alpine meadows dotted with wildflowers, crystalline streams, and breathtaking vistas. Ethan's planned route would take him through some of the most remote sections of the Cascades, culminating at a pristine alpine lake where he intended to camp for 2 nights before returning. According to the trail register, Ethan signed in at 9:50 a.m., noting his intended route and expected return date. The weather that day was ideal for hiking. Clear skies, temperatures in the mid-70s, with a light breeze. 2 other hiking groups encountered Ethan on the trail that morning, reporting nothing unusual about his demeanor or condition. At approximately 2:30 p.m., Ethan texted Lily a photo of his lunch spot, a rocky outcrop with panoramic views of the valley below. The message read, "Worth every step. Might push further than planned today. Found an unmarked trail that looks interesting." This would be his final communication. Cell phone tower data indicates that around 4:15 p.m., Ethan's phone briefly connected to a tower from a high elevation point, though no calls or texts were sent. After this, his digital presence vanished. What happened in those next critical hours remains at the heart of this mystery. Based on his hiking pace and the point of his last known location, Ethan should have reached his planned camping area by 6 p.m. Park rangers later discovered that his tent was never set up at this location. Instead, evidence suggests he veered from the main trail, following what local hikers called the Ghost Path, an unmaintained former ranger route that had been officially closed for over a decade due to dangerous terrain. Why Ethan chose to take this path, especially with daylight fading, contradicted everything friends and family knew about his cautious nature. The last definitive trace of Ethan Mercer's presence on the mountain was a water bottle bearing his distinctive stickers, found caught between rocks in a small stream approximately 2 miles along this abandoned trail. The absence of Ethan Mercer was first noted when he failed to check in with Lily on the evening of July 17th as promised. Initially unconcerned, Lily assumed poor cell reception was to blame. By the following morning, with no word from her brother, worry began to set in. She contacted the ranger station, speaking with Ranger Samantha Rivera, who assured her that delays were common and suggested waiting until Ethan missed his official return date on July 18th. When Ethan's car remained in the trailhead parking lot past his scheduled return, Ranger Rivera initiated standard search protocols. The first teams deployed on the morning of July 19th, focusing on Ethan's planned route. Helicopter surveillance, ground teams with cadaver dogs, and experienced alpinists covered the main trail and immediate surrounding areas. The search intensified when Ethan's water bottle was discovered on the unmaintained path. For 3 grueling weeks, over 70 volunteers and professionals combed the wilderness. Their efforts were hampered by the rugged terrain, dense forest sections, and numerous water features where evidence could be easily lost. The prevailing theory quickly became that Ethan had suffered a fall in the difficult off-trail section. Several dangerous ravines and unstable rock fields in the area had claimed hikers before. Without signs of struggle or foul play, authorities focused on known hazard zones. Ranger Rivera noted in her report that several sections of the abandoned trail had suffered recent erosion, creating deceptively unstable edges that could collapse under a hiker's weight. A particularly concerning area was nicknamed Deception Pass by rangers, a narrow stretch where the path appeared solid but was undermined by water erosion. Media coverage of the disappearance generated numerous tips, most proving irrelevant. However, one report from a hiker named Thomas Jensen caught investigators' attention. Jensen claimed to have seen a lone male matching Ethan's description talking to a bearded man in dirty clothes near an unofficial campsite approximately 1 mile from where the water bottle was found. This lead was investigated, but no evidence of such a campsite was discovered. After 3 weeks, with no further clues and diminishing resources, the active search was reluctantly downgraded. Ethan Mercer was officially classified as a missing person, presumed to have died in a wilderness accident. In the months following Ethan's disappearance, the landscape of lives connected to him shifted dramatically. Lily Mercer, unwilling to accept the official conclusion, took a leave of absence from her teaching position to dedicate herself to finding answers. She moved into a small rental cabin near the town of Darrington, the closest community to the trailhead, and became a fixture at the ranger station, the local diner, and anywhere she might gather information. Their parents, devastated by the loss, retreated into a private grief that eventually fractured their marriage. Marcus Collins, Ethan's friend who had canceled the trip, carried a burden of guilt that drove him to join search and rescue training, determined to help others avoid Ethan's fate. The Glacier Peak Trail itself gained a somber reputation. Hikers reported feeling uneasy in the area where Ethan was last traced, with some claiming they felt watched from the dense forest edges. Tourism declined slightly, with some avoiding the route altogether. Rangers installed additional warning signs about staying on marked trails, using Ethan's case as a cautionary tale without naming him directly. The abandoned ghost path was physically blocked with fallen logs and boulders. As months stretched into a year, Ethan's case file gathered dust at the county sheriff's office, occasionally reviewed but yielding no new insights. His social media accounts became digital memorials, frozen in time, with a comment section filled with messages from friends and strangers alike expressing condolences or sharing memories. His apartment was eventually cleared out, his possessions divided between family members or donated. Only Lily maintained active hope, creating a detailed wall map in her cabin marked with every reported sighting, weather condition, and topographical feature. She interviewed over 40 hikers who had been in the area around the time of Ethan's disappearance, compiled weather data, and studied animal migration patterns that might explain the absence of remains. Her dedication became both admiration and concern for locals, who watched as seasons changed, while Lily's determination never wavered. While the world above ground continued its cycle of seasons, another reality existed in the shadows of Glacier Peak. Unknown to searchers, Ethan Mercer had not died from a fall. The truth was far more terrifying. On that July afternoon, veering onto the unmaintained trail out of curiosity, Ethan had stumbled upon something he was never meant to see. Approximately 3 miles from the main path, hidden in a natural depression surrounded by dense vegetation, stood a crude but effective shelter constructed from salvaged materials and natural elements. This was the domain of Calvin Reeves, a former forestry worker who had gradually withdrawn from society over a decade earlier, now living completely off-grid in the wilderness. When Ethan accidentally discovered this hidden compound, Calvin was in the process of skinning a deer, an out-of-season kill that was just one of many illegal activities he conducted in his isolated existence. Startled and paranoid, Calvin quickly subdued Ethan, convinced the young hiker was actually a Forest Service investigator who had been searching for his illegal settlement. For Ethan, the next 18 months became a nightmare of confinement. Calvin had constructed a concealed root cellar beneath his main shelter, originally designed for food storage but repurposed as a prisoner hold. The space, barely 6 feet long and 4 feet high, became Ethan's world. Calvin, suffering from increasingly severe paranoid delusions, believed government agencies were searching for him to extract information about what he had seen during his former forestry work. In his distorted reality, keeping Ethan captive was both self-protection and leverage against these imagined pursuers. During summer months, Calvin would sometimes permit Ethan above ground, always bound and under strict supervision, to assist with camp maintenance or hunting. These brief moments of fresh air and movement kept Ethan alive, both physically and mentally. He carefully observed patterns, counted days by scratching marks into a small rock, and systematically tested his restraints. Through fragments of one-sided conversations, Ethan began to understand the depth of Calvin's mental deterioration and recognized that rational appeals would never secure his freedom. Instead, he adopted a strategy of gradually gaining trust while looking for opportunities. Calvin, in his isolation, sometimes treated Ethan as both prisoner and reluctant companion, occasionally sharing rambling stories about government conspiracies or his former life. During one winter excursion, while gathering firewood on a steep slope near Calvin's compound, Ethan made his first escape attempt. The ensuing struggle near a precipitous ledge resulted in Ethan losing his boot as he fought to break free. Though he initially escaped Calvin's grasp, the wilderness itself became his enemy. Without proper gear, in freezing conditions, bleeding from injuries sustained in the fight, Ethan was ultimately recaptured within hours, now missing a boot and suffering from early frostbite. As punishment, Calvin kept him confined underground through the remainder of that winter, rationing food to bare subsistence levels. The boot, kicked over the edge during the struggle, landed on a frozen ledge 800 feet below, where it would remain undisturbed until its discovery months later. Detective James Cooper was not supposed to be on Glacier Peak in January 2025. At 53, the veteran investigator from the county sheriff's department had been nudged toward desk duty following a knee injury. However, when a winter climbing expedition reported finding human remains, Cooper insisted on joining the recovery team despite the challenging conditions. Something about missing persons cases had always affected him differently, perhaps because his own brother had vanished during a camping trip decades earlier, never to be found. The recovery operation required technical climbing expertise to reach the remote ledge where the boot had been spotted. Cooper observed from a helicopter as alpine specialists secured the area and carefully documented the scene before retrieving the frozen boot with its grim contents. Initial examination revealed a high-end hiking boot, size 11, with distinctive wear patterns consistent with extensive use. The preservation of the boot and its contents in the freezing conditions would prove crucial for identification. Back at the lab, forensic technician Elise Yamamoto carefully thawed and processed the evidence. Inside the boot was a partial human foot, preserved by the freezing temperatures and protected from scavengers by the boot itself. DNA testing against samples provided by Lily over a year earlier confirmed it belonged to Ethan Mercer. The position and condition of the boot raised immediate questions. This wasn't a case of an animal dragging remains, Cooper noted in his report. The boot was found upright, as if the foot had been inside when it came to rest on that ledge. That doesn't happen in a simple fall scenario. Most significant was the cut pattern on the sock and remaining tissue. Yamamoto's analysis indicated the foot had not detached naturally through decomposition or animal activity, but showed signs of being forcibly separated, likely while Ethan was still alive. This discovery immediately transformed the case from presumed accident to potential homicide. Cooper also noted the location of the boot, not below any point on Ethan's planned route, but almost a mile laterally from the abandoned trail, suggesting he had traveled significantly farther off course than previously believed. When Cooper delivered this news to Lily Mercer, her response surprised him. Rather than breaking down, she pulled out her meticulously maintained research maps and pointed to an area she had circled months earlier. "I've been trying to tell them to look there," she said. "There's something in those woods that doesn't want to be found." The unexpected discovery of Ethan's boot transformed the investigation. For Detective Cooper, the evidence of potential foul play justified reassigning resources to a case many had considered closed. His first step was to thoroughly review the original search parameters, quickly realizing that the focus had been too narrow, constrained by assumptions about Ethan's route and typical hiker behavior patterns. Working closely with Lily, Cooper mapped a new search grid extending well beyond the abandoned trail where Ethan was last traced. Lily shared her extensive research, including her documentation of other unusual incidents in the area that had never been officially connected. Most notably, she had compiled reports of 3 other hikers who had gone missing in the same general region over the past 15 years, though none of these cases had generated the search effort that Ethan's had. Cooper was particularly interested in the case of Ray Dawson, a wildlife photographer who disappeared in 2018. Though presumed to have fallen into a ravine during bad weather, his camera equipment was never recovered. Unusual given that expensive gear typically remained even when remains were scattered by animals or elements. Cross-referencing these cases revealed a troubling pattern. All disappearances had occurred in the same approximate 10-square-mile area. All victims were solo males, and all had vanished during good weather conditions when accidents should have been less likely. Cooper also revisited the previously dismissed witness statement from Thomas Jensen about the bearded man encountered near an unofficial campsite. The original search had found no evidence of such a camp, but Cooper recognized that someone living off-grid would be skilled at concealing their presence. Working with Forest Service historical records, Cooper identified Calvin Reeves, a former seasonal employee who had been terminated in 2011 after exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior and making threats against his supervisors. Reeves had no recorded address after 2012, with his last known whereabouts being a homeless shelter in Seattle where he stayed briefly before disappearing. His forestry expertise would make him capable of surviving in the wilderness indefinitely, and his knowledge of the area would allow him to evade standard search patterns. Consulting with Ranger Rivera, Cooper learned of unusual reports from the area: occasional smoke sightings in locations with no designated campsites, missing traps from legal hunters, and unidentified tool marks on trees far from any maintained trails. These subtle signs, previously attributed to various causes, formed a pattern when viewed collectively. Cooper obtained thermal imaging equipment and coordinated with a helicopter crew for a series of aerial surveys, focusing on detecting heat signatures in areas that might conceal a permanent shelter. Winter conditions actually aided this effort, as any sustained heat source would stand out more dramatically against the cold background. After 3 flights yielded nothing conclusive, Cooper decided to change tactics, conducting the survey at dawn when someone living off-grid would likely have a morning fire going. This approach provided the breakthrough they needed: a faint but consistent heat signature in a densely wooded depression approximately 4 miles from where Ethan's water bottle had been found. The thermal imaging data provided approximate coordinates, but reaching the location required careful planning. Cooper assembled a specialized team including forest rangers with intimate knowledge of the terrain, tactical officers with wilderness training, and a medical unit prepared for any contingency. Lily insisted on joining them to a base camp position, her expertise about the area too valuable to leave behind. The approach needed to be both careful and quick, careful to avoid alerting anyone monitoring the trails, and quick enough to prevent evidence destruction if their target detected their presence. The team established a staging area 3 miles from the thermal signature, completing final preparations before dawn. Moving in small, coordinated groups through the dense forest, they maintained radio silence using hand signals and predetermined routes. As they closed in on the target area, the first physical signs appeared: subtle trail markers cut into tree bark, small branches arranged in patterns that seemed intentional rather than natural, and the occasional remnant of human passage that would be invisible to anyone not specifically looking for them. At approximately half a mile from the target, Scout Ranger Teresa Nguyen detected the distinct smell of wood smoke, barely perceptible but unmistakable. The team paused, adjusting their approach to account for wind direction. The first visual confirmation came as the forest opened slightly, revealing a cleverly disguised structure built into a natural depression in the landscape. From most angles, it would appear to be nothing more than a rocky outcrop with fallen logs and dense vegetation. But, from their current position, the artificial elements became apparent: a camouflaged chimney vent, small windows masked by suspended branches, and a partially concealed entrance. Cooper signaled for the team to establish a perimeter while he assessed the situation. Through high-powered binoculars, he observed movement inside the structure, a single male figure moving around what appeared to be a basic kitchen area. The man matched the general description of Calvin Reeves, though 15 years of wilderness living had transformed his appearance. Most concerning was the presence of multiple weapons visible within the shelter: at least 2 rifles mounted on the wall, and what appeared to be a collection of handmade spears and knives. After confirming the perimeter was secure, Cooper initiated contact using a loudspeaker, identifying himself as law enforcement and requesting Reeves to exit unarmed. The response was immediate and violent. Rifle fire erupted from a concealed firing port. None of them had detected. The tactical team took defensive positions while Cooper continued attempts at negotiation. For nearly 40 minutes, this tense standoff continued, with Reeves firing occasionally and shouting incoherent statements about government persecution and mind control. When a brief lull in the shooting occurred, sensitive audio equipment picked up sounds that changed the dynamic entirely. A faint human voice from below the structure calling for help. The confirmation of another person inside the shelter transformed the operation from arrest to rescue. After a 4-hour standoff with intermittent gunfire from Reeves, tactical officers executed a coordinated approach using terrain features for cover. As they closed in, Reeves emerged suddenly from a concealed secondary exit, firing wildly before being neutralized by the team. The structure itself proved to be more extensive than its surface appearance suggested. A main living area partially dug into the hillside with multiple concealed exits and a separate underground chamber accessed through a disguised trapdoor. It was from this underground space that the calls for help had originated. What they found below shocked even the veteran officers. A cramped earthen chamber reinforced with salvaged timber contained a makeshift bed, minimal sanitation facilities, and a single occupant, Ethan Mercer, emaciated, his hair and beard grown long, with a makeshift prosthetic fashioned from scavenged materials strapped to his left leg where his foot should have been. Despite his severe physical condition, Ethan was alert and responsive. His first words to his rescuers were simply, "You actually found me." Medical personnel immediately began treatment for malnutrition, exposure, and the improperly healed amputation site while preparing for emergency evacuation. Throughout initial treatment, Ethan remained remarkably lucid, explaining that he had performed the amputation himself after frostbite had set in following his escape attempt, using knowledge from wilderness first aid books Calvin had in his shelter. Calvin had provided minimal medical supplies but refused to seek proper help, convinced it would lead to his discovery. The shelter itself revealed the full extent of Calvin's derangement and Ethan's ordeal. Journals written by Reeves documented his declining mental state, with increasing paranoia and elaborate conspiracy theories. They also revealed that Ethan wasn't Reeves's first captive. Evidence in the shelter connected to the disappearances Cooper had identified, including personal effects from at least 2 other missing hikers. Most disturbing was a collection of modified maps where Reeves had marked territories he considered his and listed intrusions by hikers he had encountered. Some names were simply noted, while others were crossed out, including Ethan's and those of the other missing persons. As Ethan was carefully transported from the site, he asked to speak privately with Cooper. "He told me once why he kept me alive when he killed the others," Ethan whispered. "He said I reminded him of his son. I don't think he ever had a son, but that delusion saved my life." Before being loaded into the medical helicopter, Ethan had one final request: to see his sister. The reunion between Lily and Ethan, occurring on the same mountain that had separated them 18 months earlier, left even the hardened tactical team members visibly moved. The weeks following Ethan's rescue saw a complex legal and medical process unfold. Calvin Reeves was pronounced dead at the scene, eliminating the possibility of a trial, but also many potential answers about his other victims. Forensic teams spent over a month processing the shelter site, recovering evidence linking Reeves to the disappearances of Ray Dawson and at least one other missing hiker. The remains of these victims were eventually discovered in shallow graves scattered throughout the area Reeves had claimed as his territory. For Ethan, physical recovery began with proper treatment of his improperly healed amputation, requiring multiple surgeries to correct damage from his self-performed procedure. Psychological healing proved equally challenging, with specialists in trauma and captivity working to help him process his 18-month ordeal. Remarkably, Ethan's detailed memory and methodical nature served him well during this period. He had mentally preserved his experiences with clarity that proved invaluable both for his own recovery and for providing closure to families of Reeves's other victims. Media interest in the case was intense, with outlets from around the world seeking interviews and offering exclusive rights to Ethan's story. Through Lily, he declined all requests, focusing instead on his recovery and reconnection with family. Law enforcement and wilderness agencies conducted comprehensive reviews of their missing persons protocols, with Cooper leading the development of new procedures specifically addressing the possibility of human predators in wilderness areas. Rangers installed additional emergency beacons throughout the Glacier Peak wilderness, and hiker registration systems were upgraded to include more detailed tracking. The site of Reeves's shelter was thoroughly demolished after evidence collection was complete, with rangers ensuring no trace remained that might attract dark tourism or copycats. In a private ceremony attended only by family and the core team involved in his rescue, Ethan returned to the trailhead where his ordeal had begun. There, he left his remaining original hiking boot, now paired with the recovered one that had led to his discovery, as a memorial to those who hadn't survived their encounters with Calvin Reeves. These were supposed to carry me through many journeys, he told Cooper. Instead, they carried me home from the darkest one possible. 6 months after his rescue, Ethan Mercer stood before an audience for the first time, addressing a conference of search and rescue professionals. Walking with a state-of-the-art prosthetic foot donated by a medical technology company moved by his story, he spoke with composed clarity about his experience and the lessons it offered for wilderness safety. "Preparation saved my life," he explained. "Not just physical preparation, but mental. Those marks I scratched to count days weren't just a calendar. They were a promise to myself that days would continue, that eventually one of those marks would be the last one in captivity." Lily sat in the front row, having finally returned to her teaching position, though now incorporating wilderness safety into her curriculum. Their parents, finding their way back to each other through their shared joy at Ethan's return, watched with tear-filled eyes from beside her. Marcus Collins, now a certified search and rescue volunteer, stood at the back of the room in his official uniform. Detective Cooper, recently promoted to head a new specialized unit focused on remote area criminal activity, had become a regular visitor to the Mercer home, his own decades-old wound of his brother's disappearance finding some healing through Ethan's recovery. For the families of Calvin Reeves's other victims, closure came in different forms. Ray Dawson's parents established a foundation funding wildlife photography scholarships, continuing the passion their son never got to fully pursue. The recovered camera equipment, though damaged, contained images Ray had taken shortly before his encounter with Reeves. His final photographs ultimately displayed in a gallery exhibition, honoring his eye for wilderness beauty. The Glacier Peak Trail itself had been permanently altered, both physically through improved safety measures and psychologically in how people perceived it. Hikers still came, perhaps even more than before, but with a heightened awareness of both the natural dangers and the rare but real human threats that wilderness spaces can conceal. Ethan's experience had transformed public perception of hiking safety, shifting focus from equipment and weather awareness to include situational awareness and communication protocols. Ethan himself had not yet returned to the deeper wilderness, though he frequently visited easier trails with Lily or Cooper. His environmental science degree now found purpose in consulting on wilderness safety protocols and technology. The psychological scars remained, manifesting in occasional nightmares and a heightened startle response to certain triggers, but these were increasingly manageable with continued therapy. "The mountain taught me two contradictory truths," Ethan concluded in his address, "that humans are capable of both unimaginable cruelty and extraordinary resilience. I choose to carry the second lesson forward." As the audience rose in standing ovation, Ethan stood tall on his prosthetic foot, a foot that might never have touched ground again if not for a single boot on a frozen ledge that refused to remain hidden. The story of Ethan Mercer and Calvin Reeves eventually faded from headlines, but its impact continued to ripple outward in less visible ways. 3 years after his rescue, Ethan published a memoir titled Counting Days that became required reading in wilderness survival courses across the country. The book focused less on the sensational aspects of his captivity and more on the psychological tools that preserved his humanity through isolation and fear. Rather than portraying himself as exceptional, Ethan emphasized the universal human capacity for endurance when purpose remains clear. Lily Mercer expanded her teaching career into outdoor education, leading wilderness safety programs for young adults that balanced appreciation for nature with practical safety awareness. The siblings established the Wilderness Watch Foundation, which funded satellite emergency beacons available for free checkout at trailheads throughout the Pacific Northwest. Detective Cooper retired 2 years after Ethan's rescue, but continued working as a consultant for cases involving remote area disappearances. His methods for analyzing wilderness missing persons cases, developed during the search for Ethan, became standard procedure in departments nationwide. The psychological profile of Calvin Reeves, compiled posthumously through his journals and Ethan's testimony, provided valuable insights into the rare but dangerous phenomenon of wilderness predators. Mental health researchers identified key intervention points where Reeves' descent into paranoia and violence might have been prevented with proper treatment. The U.S. Forest Service implemented new monitoring protocols for employees showing signs of psychological distress, particularly those working in isolation. For the families of Reeves's victims who never returned, the answers provided through Ethan's testimony offered a painful but necessary closure. Memorial benches were placed at the Glacier Peak trailhead, each bearing a simple plaque with a name and the phrase, "The wilderness called them home." Ethan visited these benches regularly, often sitting in silent contemplation of how differently his story might have ended. His prosthetic foot, upgraded several times through advancing technology, eventually allowed him to return to moderate hiking, though always with companions and enhanced safety equipment. On the 5th anniversary of his rescue, Ethan led a small group including Lily Cooper and Ranger Rivera to a viewpoint overlooking the area where his ordeal had unfolded. The forest had reclaimed the site of Reeves's shelter, with new growth covering the scars of human presence. Standing on the mountain that had nearly claimed his life, watching sunrise illuminate the peak, Ethan finally found the words for the feeling that had been growing within him. "The mountain wasn't my enemy," he said quietly. "It was my witness, and in the end, it spoke for those who couldn't speak for themselves." As they made their way back down the trail, Ethan moved with the balanced gait of someone who had found his footing not despite his wounds, but through them.